When Palpatine returned, it was quite the surprise to both casual and hardcore fans. But now we have to ask, is Bad Batch Season 3 fixing one of the biggest gaps in the galaxy? And why does it take so long? Welcome to Star Wars Uplink. After the first 3 episodes of Bad Batch Season 3, I am really looking forward to where the story is going to go. It's taking a little bit of a slower approach, which I always appreciate, especially in this kind of storytelling where they know they have quite a few episodes to get through. Give the chance for characters to grow, this relationship between Crosshair and Omega to blossom and just build and flesh out what we have to work with. And I'm really looking forward to it. And I think the big question that we all have is, how is Palpatine really going into play here? Because we see him in the 3rd episode, and I honestly didn't expect to see him so quickly. I knew he was going to be a big part of this, but I didn't expect for him to be in it so quickly. And this is the part that I'm most excited about, because obviously with the sequel trilogy, they didn't quite have a plan on where they were going to go, and it felt like Palpatine really was just thrown into the mix of things just because he was Palpatine. And I'm seeing a lot of discussions on this online around how almost like Palpatine is the devil, like he is evil and incarnate, and he is not just going to go away in any of the eras. But I do want to bring up the fact and play around with this idea of Project Necromancer, of what really Palpatine was working on, because Project Necromancer is really interesting when you look at the details of it. It's this idea that Palpatine, yes, knew he was going to die and wanted to incorporate clones in various aspects across the galaxy and give the opportunity for him to move forward into the future and continue down this pathway of almost becoming invincible or immortal, but just in a different way than we'd probably expect. Because we have Dr. Hemlock here, and he's doing some crazy experimentation. We have the key that is Omega in this path into the future. And we know that they do end up working with Midichlorians and replicating clones with the Force abilities, because that's, I think the theory or the confirmation here is that the Palpatine that was on the 2nd Death Star wasn't actually Palpatine, it was a clone of Palpatine. That's at least how I read that, because for all intents and purposes, Palpatine does die. But he comes back in Rise of Skywalker, and I don't necessarily know if it's, and I think that's the point, is we don't know which clone is which, and I think that just tells us that there was success in a Palpatine clone being made, or something along those lines. It's very complicated, and it's getting into that Legends kind of context, where Legends was a lot more complicated than a lot of people realize or understand when they make references of canon being not as good as Legends. There were a lot of complexities when it comes to Legends content, but when we look at Hemlock and Palpatine's plan here, it's to replicate midichlorians and force sensitivity into clones to further invest into this idea of Palpatine living forever and to be eternal. I really am fascinated by this idea that it takes him 52 years for this to really happen, because if you look at it, Bad Batch takes place around like 18 or 19 BBY, possibly even 17 or 16, we don't know specifically right now yet, but there's quite a bit of time to where Rise of Skywalker takes place, which is 34 years after the Battle of Yavin. So it ends up being around 50 to 52 to 54 years, depending on which specific time frame they're in. And it's just so interesting to see these similar time frames. The idea that Moff Gideon was trying to replicate clones and give him the clone himself, but give him the ability to have force, or force sensitivity, or force powers, or whatever ends up happening. While Palpatine at some point was able to successfully do that in the time frame between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. So there's a lot of moving pieces here when we look at the specifics of what's exactly happening in terms of these. They aren't parallel in terms of like what times they actually take place in, but they're parallel stories when you look at the similar processes that Moff Gideon's going through and Dr. Hemlock are going through into giving a clone the ability to have the Force. And it's really fascinating, and it really comes to this idea that is very much explored in Legends, where Palpatine is heavily researching into clones and Force sensitivity. If you look at like the Force Unleashed, that's a big piece of that game. There's a lot of moving pieces here when we look at the time frame of Palpatine's experimentation with cloning. And then if we look at his ultimate plan here is to live forever, whether that's himself or his clones. And if he has the ability to incorporate his consciousness, incorporate his Force abilities, he ends up just being able to live forever in theory, and have a greater effect and control throughout the events of the entire Skywalker saga. And my ultimate idea here is that Bad Batch seems to actually be trying to bridge the gap in terms of, hey, they didn't necessarily plan for Palpatine to return originally, or it wasn't ultimately in the cards here. But now that is the ultimate future, they're trying to go back and flesh out this idea of Palpatine returning, Palpatine being a clone, Palpatine having Force abilities, and have the ability to have greater impact across all of the things, to put Snoke into the position that he's in, to have kids and recreate himself in a different form in terms of Rey, which is another type of immortality. And I'm honestly thinking about this, that there's a lot of similarities between like Palpatine and Voldemort from Harry Potter, if you really look down to it, instead of like Horcruxes that's just cloning. But that's just a little side tangent piece that I find funny to think of about these two villainous characters. But this time frame is really fascinating to look at from the perspective of, they know where they need to go. They know they have to do certain things. They know Palpatine has to be successful at cloning. Now, the fun part with Bad Batch Season 3 is how we get there. And I don't think when we looked at, or we started watching Bad Batch, that we'd say, oh, hey, yeah, you know, we're actually going to flesh out this really interesting topic when it comes to cloning and humanity and what it means to have purpose as a clone, and find out the specific details of Palpatine's history and creation of the Force and his clones. I'm really interested to see where it goes and what Palpatine's secret plan ultimately is in terms of this timeline, in terms of these characters. How is it actually, are they going to use Omega's ability and her unique qualities when it comes to cloning? Are they going to use that, or are they going to find alternatives? Or like, what does it look like to impact the Bad Batch themselves? I'm really interested to see where things go in the future, but let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, check out our podcast, and may the Force be with you.